can have a lot more stability as to, you know, who you are, how you carry yourself, the confidence that you go through life with. Okay, so in today's video, we're gonna do a deep dive, and this might be the only video you ever need to see about how to create greater connections with people, or why you might struggle to create connections with people in your daily life. It's a bit of a deep dive, like I said. It's gonna require you to bear with me as we go through this, but I guarantee that after this video, you'll have more clarity and a blueprint that you can directly apply to start seeing changes in your social life. And we're gonna start right away. So I got my board here, and what I want to start with is to start by addressing misconceptions that we have. And one of the biggest ones that we walk around and carry with is that there's a difference between the self and the self in relationship with others. We sometimes tend to think that, you know, that those things don't really link, as if a lot of us, you will use like introvert and extrovert and stuff like that. I think that more clarity as to how does social system work and how do we work in face of that can allow us to no longer use that as a crutch and be able to move, you know, beyond that. Which brings us to my next point, is that if you get rid of this separation here, right, and you start to look at it as the same, you realize that both our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with people is always based on this search for connection. People go to great length for this search for connection. People will, you know, use drugs, use microdosing, will, you know, go on these crazy trips and things of that nature. People will go to great lengths to try to create connection. And one of the main things to understand about this point is that it sort of supports this idea that the whole thing, whether it's by yourself or with people, it's always this search for connection. On the other side, when it's not just a search for connection with the self, we look for connection with people such as love. We look for sometimes connection with people which are more in the instant gratification type of thing, sort of like validation or you know, affection, and all those things are sort of a connection that we look for in the immediate to make us feel like what we're really craving, which is a deeper sense of that. Once we start to look at it as a search for connection, the thing is that it changed a lot of things. Now it's no longer about this whole thing that we cannot control, and it's more about controlling how can we enhance that sense of connection. What are the things that actually bring us closer to this idea of connection? And this is where we get into the next point, which is to look at things in a context. And this image you can use when you sort of speak about, when you think about yourself, when you think about yourself when you're in relationship with other people. And for this, I'll use an example. So for this example, you can use anything, but whatever example pops to your head. For me, I'll use a mug. The idea that if you use this, right, and you put it in a kitchen, right, you call it a mug, right? If you were to take it and put it in an art gallery, you could call it art, right? And you've seen things that are more, how do you say, more uncanny than this being called art. And so it sort of goes to prove my point, because then it will be treated as such, right? In the kitchen is treated that way, and if you put this in a warehouse, this would be just it would be stock, it would be an article. But in all of those things, my point is that it's the same object. Let's say this is you know, in the kitchen, and then it gets taken from the kitchen and put into an office, right? And you walk into the office and you look at it and you would call it a mug, right? Or this you might even look at in art gallery and you still call it a mug, right? Because the context in which you know this object, its nature, is that original state, the kitchen, pretty much. The point here is to say that this object doesn't change based on that context. It still has a definition of its own, and that definition is based on where it is from, right? And so then now there's this thing, and here's where it's important to pay attention, is that if we use the example of the mug, we start to differentiate between having a horizontal versus vertical connection. That's how I like to look at it, because it makes it really simple. When you look at things from a vertical versus horizontal point of view. What we mean by this is the following. A vertical, what I like to call a vertical connection versus a horizontal connection, it depends on the point of view. The point here being that the mug, word itself, mug, is based on a simple concept. We only know things in relationship to other objects. So for example, the mug only makes sense to call it a mug because you know a mug to be used in the context, for example, of a kitchen, to pour coffee in, water in, to pour tea in. The idea of the mug is the object, and the context is where that, you know, that definition is, where the harmony is. Whereas the horizontal point of view is between the object and not a context, but a point of view. Here it becomes more, I'll use the word subjective for lack of better words. The idea of the same object as we see here put into an art gallery now will be looked at as art. You see, same object, the mug, if you put it into a warehouse, now is looked at as stock or just merchandise. This is the difference between horizontal and vertical point of view. Why this is relevant is that to a certain extent it comes back to this idea of the separation, right? There's the self and there's the self in relationship with others. And so if you live your life like this, it's going to be really hard, because whoever is the subject that looks at you changes who you are in a way. Connection here is not one which is like lasting. Subject changes often. But if you have a relationship with yourself which is more vertical, like the mug and the kitchen, you can live a life which is a lot less dependent on people. You have a sense of connection which is a lot stronger than this one. And so here you can have a lot more stability as to, you know, who you are, how you carry yourself, the confidence that you go through life with. Not only that, but it's a lot more flow. Whereas this can be chopped. The cycle from which, like, you know, the subject changes to another subject, to another subject. You see how, like, it's not a flow, it's more of a picture. It's a picture to picture. So the point here, why we're going to this deep dive, is that we need to practice things that enhance our connection. Things that enhance our connections to ourselves. By doing that, we can free ourselves from the misconception that there's a difference between us with ourselves and us in relationship with others. And we can just have one simple point of view from which we carry ourselves through life, because that, wherever you go, that will follow you. You cannot have a system which is a lot stronger rather than one which is weaker. So how do we do that? How do we practice things which enhance our connection? And this is where the next point that comes. We recognize those things by flow state. And so you can make a list. You can make a list of things that bring you closer to your sense of self, and also which creates a time frame where you forget time as it passes by. And once you recognize that when I do this activity, I just sort of lose track of time, and I can just do this until I pretty much get tired, you can add it to the list. And by practicing that, in that moment, you're in full sort of harmony with yourself. And in that moment, you have a stronger connection with you. The benefit here is it's not solely to be able to create a stronger connection with yourself, but is that by practicing this, you can then go into anywhere else you go in life, and when you come to deal with other people, you have been practicing to create connection. And in this new environment, instead of finding yourself looking for connection to be built like this, connections now become sort of, is the same thing as a vertical one, right? but this connection with this other person becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. It doesn't come from a place of fear, it comes from a place of abundance. And so you recognize things that create a stronger relationship with yourself through the activities would bring flow state. Practice those things to create higher sense of connection with yourself. You get rid of the misconception that there is a difference between dealing with yourself and dealing with yourself with other people. And from there, by practicing this, you're able to not only create more connection within you, but then you can also bring it into other environments, create the same outcome that you've been practicing this whole time. And so that's the last point, is that it's kind of like in sports. You revert back to practice. It doesn't matter what the situation is, who the person is, but by you having this series of things that you do on your free time, which prioritize you, which put more attention towards that connection, it will be a lot easier to create connection with other people. And when you start to look at it this way, I think it can change a lot of things. This here is what we can call ego, right? We refer to it as ego, is this idea of how we look to others, how do we perceive. But here, the ego sort of dies. And in another video, we could talk about the things which lead us to start doing this, which is an interesting dive in itself. But the main point here is just to have something to look towards, a blueprint as to how are we going to navigate this. Because the problem is that to try to create things which make you look better as an image, and to think that will change your social interactions, is actually not true. It will actually just create instant gratification. For example, going and starting to create, starting to work out all the time and chase things such as, better appeal, better money, stuff like that. Those things are great. But if your point is to try to create or find connection with other people, it won't work. But if you can create a sense of individualism, if you can create a sense of self, like you are somebody because you are somebody, like this, then you can truly start to create a connection with other people. And it won't come from a place of scarcity, it'll come from a place of abundance. I hope that makes sense. That was a lot to cover. Thank you for watching. If you're at this point in the video, I really appreciate it. I hope that was able to bring some clarity, or maybe even sort of bring a sense of understanding to a world that can be overwhelming. And if it did, please leave a comment, let me know what you thought. If you have any questions, and if you watched to this point, I'd be really interested to know. And I'll see you in the next one.